He was a billionaire who could buy anything, except time. And on a cold, rainy night, time was exactly what two little girls didn't have. Under a bridge, soaked and shaking, they weren't begging. They weren't calling for help. They were just trying to survive quietly, like they'd already learned the world didn't like being bothered. But what broke him wasn't their tears. It was what they said when he asked their names. "We're waiting for a place that doesn't send us away." 48 hours later, a courtroom would decide their fate. One decision. One signature. One moment that could erase them, or finally give them a home. And the man who found them would have to choose. Walk away like everyone else, or fight a system built to forget children like them. Before we begin, if stories like this move you, touch your heart, and remind you what truly matters, consider subscribing. You're not just watching a story, you're becoming part of it. It was one of those nights when the rain didn't fall. It lingered. Slow, cold, steady, like the city itself was tired. Cashin Vale sat in the back of his black sedan, staring out at blurred streetlights that melted into long streaks of gold and white. The kind of quiet only rich men understand. Not peaceful, just empty. He had just left another meeting. Another deal closed. Another number added to a life that already had too many numbers and not enough meaning. Then he heard it. At first, it didn't register. It wasn't loud. It wasn't desperate. It was small. A thin, trembling cry. The kind that didn't ask for attention, just permission to exist. Cashin leaned forward slightly. "Stop the car." The driver hesitated for half a second, then pulled over beneath an overpass where shadows swallowed everything. The rain sounded louder here. Harsher. Cashin stepped out, his expensive shoes hitting wet concrete. Cold air wrapped around him instantly, sharp and unforgiving. And then he heard it again. Two voices. One crying. The other whispering. Soft, careful, trying to comfort, like a child pretending to be an adult. Cashin didn't know why he walked toward Pillar 3. But something inside him pulled him there. And that's when he saw them. Two little girls. Maybe 5 years old. Sitting close together under a patch of space that wasn't dry. Just less wet. Their hoodies were faded. Their sneakers worn down like they had walked too far for such small feet. One of them clutched a torn backpack against her chest like it held her heart. The other protected a folded piece of paper under her hoodie, shielding it from the rain like it was something priceless. Cashin stopped a few feet away. For a moment, he didn't speak. Because something about the way they sat there, quiet, still, not asking for anything, it didn't feel like poverty. It felt like experience. "Hey!" he said finally, his voice softer than usual. The crying stopped instantly. Two pairs of eyes lifted. Not scared. Not surprised. Just careful. Like they were deciding if he was someone who would let them stay, or someone who would make them leave. Cashin slowly crouched down, keeping his distance. "I'm not here to scare you," he said gently. "Are you okay?" The girl with the backpack didn't answer. She leaned closer to the other one. The second girl swallowed, then spoke in a quiet, polite voice. "We're fine." Cashin felt something shift inside his chest. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a crack in something he didn't know was still there. "What are your names?" he asked. The girl holding the paper hesitated, like names were something fragile. "Lenny." The other followed softly. "Nova." Cashin nodded slowly. "Those are beautiful names." Nova watched him carefully. Kids who grow up with nothing, they don't trust smiles. They study them. "Do you have someone I can call?" Cashin asked. "A parent, a relative, anyone?" The girls looked at each other. Not confused. Just confirming something silently. Then Lenny shook her head. "We're waiting." Cashin frowned slightly. Waiting for who? Lenny's voice stayed soft. For a place. Cashin repeated quietly. A place. Nova lifted her chin just a little. A place that doesn't send us away. That sentence didn't sound like hope. It sounded like a rule they had learned the hard way. Don't ask for too much. Just ask to stay. Cashin exhaled slowly, the weight of those words settling deeper than he expected. Have you been here long? He asked. Sometimes, Nova said. Not when it's busy, Lenny added. Cashin glanced around the empty underpass. Cold. Forgotten. Invisible. The kind of place people drive past every day without ever seeing. Are you hungry? He asked. Nova shook her head too quickly. We're okay. And then, a small sound. Lenny's stomach betrayed her. She froze, embarrassed. Cashin didn't smile. Didn't joke. He just nodded. Okay, he said calmly. We'll get food. Nova frowned slightly. Food costs. Cashin nodded. It does. She studied him carefully. Then why? And in that moment, Cashin realized something. These girls didn't just understand poverty. They understood transactions. Everything had a price. Everything had a reason. So he gave them the only answer that wouldn't scare them. Because you're kids, he said quietly. And kids shouldn't have to plan how to survive the rain. Lenny's fingers tightened around the paper. Cashin noticed. What is that? He asked gently. Lenny looked at Nova. Nova gave a small nod. Slowly, carefully, Lenny unfolded the paper. Cashin leaned in slightly. And what he saw made everything in his world, money, power, success, feel suddenly meaningless. Because written on that small, wrinkled paper wasn't a drawing. It was a survival plan. And the first line read, Rain days, under bridge, pillar 3. Cashin didn't move for a few seconds. The rain kept falling. The city kept breathing. Cars passed above them like distant thunder. But under that bridge, everything felt still. He looked at the paper again. Each line was written in careful, uneven letters, like someone had practiced over and over, trying to make it perfect. Rain days, under bridge, pillar 3. Cold days, bus station vent. Sundays, library steps. If told to leave, say sorry and go. Cashin's throat tightened. Who made this? He asked quietly. Nova answered like it was obvious. We did. Lenny nodded, holding the paper tighter. It helps us remember, where people don't get mad. Those words didn't hit loud. They sank. Slow, heavy, permanent. Cashin had spent his entire life building places people wanted to be in. Luxury towers. Offices with glass walls. Spaces filled with comfort and control. And yet, these two little girls had built something far more important. A map of where they were allowed to exist. He took a slow breath. You don't have to do this anymore, he said gently. Nova studied his face. Is this a trick? Cashin shook his head. No. Lenny's voice came softer this time. People say no, and then they leave. Cashin didn't look away. I'm not leaving. There was no dramatic music. No instant trust. Just silence. The kind that decides everything. Then Cashin stood slowly, keeping his movements calm. Come with me, he said. Just for tonight. Nova's eyes narrowed slightly. Where? Somewhere warm, Cashin replied. Somewhere dry. And safe? She asked, almost whispering. Cashin nodded. Safe is real. That word stayed in the air. Safe. Like something they had heard about, but never really touched. Cashin extended his hand. Not too close. Not forcing. Just offering. Lenny didn't take it. Instead, she folded the paper carefully, like it was something sacred, and placed it back into her backpack. Nova stood first. Lenny followed. They didn't hold his hand, but they walked toward him, and that was enough. The ride through the city was quiet. Nova sat by the window, watching lights stretch into long glowing lines, counting them under her breath. Lenny sat closer to the middle, her backpack still pressed tightly against her chest. Cashin sat across from them, not staring, just present. "If you need me to stop," he said calmly, "you can say so." Nova blinked. "Why?" "Because this is your choice too." That confused her. Kids like them weren't used to choices. They were used to adapting. Nova nodded slowly, like she was storing that idea somewhere important. A few minutes later, Cashin spoke again. "Are you hungry?" Nova opened her mouth. Stopped. Lenny answered instead. "A little." Cashin gave a small nod. "A little is enough." They stopped at a quiet diner. Nothing fancy. Warm lights. Soft noise. The smell of fresh soup. Cashin ordered simply. Soup. Bread. Warm milk. No overwhelming menu. No pressure. He sat across from them, not watching closely, just letting them be. Nova dipped her spoon into the soup carefully, then took a small sip. Her eyes widened. "It's hot." Cashin gave the smallest smile. "It's supposed to be." Lenny broke her bread into 2 exact pieces and handed one to Nova before taking her own. Cashin noticed. That small act. That instinct to share before taking. It said more than anything they had spoken. After dinner, they drove again. This time, the city changed. Taller buildings. Quieter streets. Lights that didn't flicker. The car stopped in front of a high-rise building that looked nothing like the world they came from. Nova looked up at it. "Is this a hotel?" Cashin shook his head. "No. It's home." Lenny tightened her grip on her backpack. "Do we have to leave in the morning?" Cashin paused for just a second, then answered carefully. "No one is asking you to leave." That answer mattered, because it didn't promise forever. But it didn't threaten tomorrow either. Inside, everything was quiet. Staff moved respectfully, without questions, without staring. A guest room had already been prepared. Soft lighting. Clean sheets. A small lamp glowing like a moon beside the bed. Nova stepped in slowly. She reached out and touched the bed with just her fingertips. "Is this for looking?" she asked. Cashin shook his head. "For sleeping." Lenny stood near the doorway, not stepping in fully. "Are you sure?" Cashin met her eyes. "Yes." That word landed differently this time. Nova climbed onto the bed carefully, like it might disappear if she moved too fast. Lenny followed, slower. They sat close together, still holding on to each other, but just a little less tightly now. Cashin stepped back toward the door. "I'll be right outside if you need anything," he said. Nova hesitated, then asked the question that had probably followed her for years. "Do people change their minds?" Cashin didn't answer right away, because that question wasn't simple. But he didn't lie. "Some do," he said quietly. Nova looked down. Lenny tightened her grip on the blanket. Cashin took one step closer. "But I don't make promises I can't keep." Silence. Then Nova gave a small nod. Cashin turned off the main light, leaving only the soft glow of the lamp. As he stepped out and gently closed the door, he heard something he hadn't expected. Not crying. Not whispering. Just breathing. 2 little girls, finally resting without planning their next move. Cashin stood in the hallway longer than he needed to. Something inside him felt different. Not heavy. Not empty. Just awake. But down the hall, inside that quiet room, Lenny's eyes slowly opened again. She didn't move. Didn't wake Nova. She just stared at the ceiling, listening, waiting, like part of her still believed this was just another place, and morning would take it away. Lenny didn't close her eyes again. The room was quiet, too quiet. No dripping water. No passing footsteps above. No sudden voices telling them to move along. Just stillness. And for a child who had learned to survive by listening, silence didn't feel safe. It felt temporary. She slowly turned her head, looking at Nova curled beside her, breathing softly, her hand still loosely gripping the edge of the blanket like she might lose it if she let go completely. Lenny adjusted the blanket over her sister's shoulder, careful not to wake her. Then she sat up. Her eyes moved around the room. The soft lamp. The clean walls. The untouched corners. Nothing felt real. She slid off the bed quietly, her small feet pressing into the warm floor. Even that felt strange. Warmth under her feet. She walked toward the door and opened it just a little. The hallway light spilled in, gentle and calm. Cashin was still there. Not right outside the door, but down the hall, leaning against the wall, arms crossed loosely, eyes unfocused like he'd been thinking too much. He looked up the moment the door moved. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then Cashin straightened slightly. "Hey," he said softly. "You okay?" Lenny hesitated, then nodded. But she didn't go back inside. Cashin noticed. "You can't sleep?" he asked. Lenny stepped out into the hallway, leaving the door open behind her. "Do we have to wake up early?" she asked quietly. Cashin shook his head. "No." She looked down at the floor. "Do we have to leave early?" There it was. Not fear. Expectation. Cashin pushed himself off the wall and crouched down to her level, keeping his voice steady. "No one is asking you to leave tomorrow." Lenny studied his face. Not his words. His face. Like she was checking for cracks. "Tomorrow is a real day?" she asked. Cashin nodded. "It's a real day." Lenny didn't smile. But something in her shoulders loosened. Just a little. She glanced back toward the room. "Nova sleeps better when it's quiet," she said. Cashin gave a small nod. "Good." Lenny hesitated again. Then asked something that didn't sound like a child's question. "If we stay, do we have to be extra good?" Cashin's expression softened. "No." Lenny frowned slightly. "But people let you stay longer if you don't make trouble." Cashin shook his head slowly. "You don't earn a place by being invisible." That sentence hung between them. New. Unfamiliar. Lenny didn't fully understand it. But she felt it. Cashin stood and gently gestured toward the room. "Try to sleep," he said. "I'll still be here." Lenny nodded once. Then quietly went back inside. Cashin stayed in the hallway a little longer, listening. After a few minutes, the room settled again. 2 steady breaths. He finally walked away. Morning didn't rush in. It arrived softly, like it didn't want to break anything. Sunlight slipped through the tall windows, stretching across the floor in quiet gold lines. Nova stirred first this time. Her eyes opened slowly, then widened. For a second, she didn't move. Then she sat up quickly. "Lenny." Lenny opened her eyes instantly, alert. They both looked around the room. The bed. The walls. The soft light. Nothing had changed. They hadn't been moved. Nova blinked. "Did we forget a rule?" she whispered. Lenny shook her head slowly. "I don't think so." A soft knock came at the door. Both girls froze. Cashin's voice followed, calm and steady. "Good morning." He didn't open the door. He waited. Lenny looked at Nova. Nova nodded. "Okay," Lenny said. Cashin opened the door slightly and stepped in. Not too far. Just enough. "Morning," he said again, a faint smile on his face. They stared at him, waiting. For instructions. For conditions. For the part where something changes. Cashin noticed it. So he walked over to the small table and placed something down. "A card." "I made something," he said. Nova tilted her head. "A list." Cashin nodded. "A different kind." Lenny climbed off the bed slowly and walked over. Nova followed. They stood side by side, reading. Cashin had written in clear, simple words. 1. Eat when you're hungry. 2. Sleep when you're tired. 3. Ask questions when you don't understand. 4. He paused slightly, then continued. No one sends you away without explaining why. The room went quiet. Lenny read it again. Slower. "Safe is rule 4, she said. Cashin nodded. "Yeah." Nova looked up at him. "What if we make mistakes?" Cashin didn't hesitate. "Then we fix them." That answer didn't sound like anything they had lived before. Lenny looked at Nova. Nova looked back. Neither of them spoke. But something shifted between them. Later, they sat at the table with crayons Cashin had quietly placed there. Nova drew a sun. Lenny wrote her name. Carefully. Each letter placed like it mattered. From the other side of the glass wall, Cashin watched. Not like a man observing children. Like someone trying to understand something he had missed his entire life. He stepped into his office and closed the door gently. Then he made a call. "Noah," he said. There was no small talk. No pause. "I need you." The voice on the other end sharpened immediately. What happened? Cashin looked through the glass again. At two little girls sitting close together. Coloring like it was the most important thing in the world. "I found 2 5-year-olds under an overpass," he said. "They have names." A pause. Then, "And?" Cashin's voice dropped slightly. "They don't exist on paper." Silence. Heavy. Then Noah spoke, slower this time. "Are they safe?" "Yes." "Did you report it?" "Not yet." Another pause. Longer. More careful. "We need to do this right," Noah said. "That means involving child services." Cashin's jaw tightened slightly. "I know." His eyes didn't leave the girls. "I just don't want them moved." Noah exhaled. "They might be." Cashin closed his eyes for a brief second. Then opened them again. Focused. Clear. "Then we move faster." There was a knock at the front door not long after. Firm. Professional. Inevitable. Cashin already knew who it was. He walked to the door and opened it. A woman stood there, composed, observant, holding a folder close to her chest. "Mr. Vale," she said politely. "I'm Maris Calder, from Child Services." Cashin stepped aside immediately. "Come in." Inside, the air felt different. Not tense, but aware. Maris's eyes moved through the space quickly. Not judging. Assessing. Then she saw them. Lenny and Nova sat on the couch now, their feet barely touching the floor, hands folded neatly in their laps like they had practiced being small again. Maris softened slightly and walked toward them, lowering herself to their level. "Hi," she said gently. "I'm Maris." Nova tilted her head. "Are you a rule person?" Maris smiled. "Yes." A small pause. Then she added, "But I like kind rules." Lenny's fingers tightened slightly. Do we have to go now? Maris didn't answer right away. She glanced at Cashin, then back at the girls. We're going to figure things out, she said softly. Not a yes, not a no. And that uncertainty settled into the room like a quiet storm just beginning to form. The room stayed quiet after that. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the kind that listens. Lenny and Nova didn't move right away. They sat there, hands folded, shoulders slightly stiff, like they already knew this moment mattered more than anything that came before it. Maris didn't rush them. She simply opened her folder and sat on the edge of the chair across from them, lowering herself so she wasn't towering over them. Can I ask you a few questions? She said gently. Nova glanced at Lenny. Lenny gave a small nod. Okay, Nova replied. Maris smiled softly and tapped her pen once. What are your full names? Lenny answered first, careful and clear. Lenny Wren. Nova followed. Nova Wren. Maris wrote it down, her pen moving smoothly across the paper. Then she paused. Not long, but long enough for Cashin to notice. Her eyes shifted to the tablet in her lap. She typed something. Stopped. Typed again. The air changed. Subtle, but real. Cashin stepped a little closer. What is it? He asked calmly. Maris didn't look up immediately. I'm not finding active records, she said finally. Nova frowned slightly. But we're here. Maris lifted her eyes to her, voice still kind. I see you. Then she added, more quietly. But the system doesn't. That sentence landed heavier than anything else so far. Lenny's fingers curled into her sleeves. Is that bad? She asked. Maris didn't lie. It makes things harder. Cashin straightened just a little. What happens now? Maris closed her tablet gently. We open an emergency intake, she said. That starts the process. Cashin's voice stayed level. And until then? Maris held his gaze. There are procedures. Nova looked up at Cashin. Procedures means rules, she said softly. Cashin nodded once. Yes. Lenny swallowed. Do rules mean we go somewhere else? Maris hesitated. Just for a second. But children notice seconds. There's a window, she said carefully. 48 hours. Cashin's jaw tightened slightly. 48 hours for what? Maris answered clearly. To determine placement. Nova blinked. How many sleeps is that? 2, Maris said. Nova looked down. That's not many. Silence settled again. Not loud. Just heavy. Cashin crouched slightly, bringing himself back to their level. You're not going anywhere today, he said. Nova looked at him. And tomorrow? Cashin didn't rush the answer. But when he spoke, his voice was steady. Tomorrow, we figure it out the right way. Lenny didn't look convinced. But she nodded anyway. Because sometimes, nodding is the only control you have. Maris continued asking questions. Simple ones. Gentle ones. Do you remember a school? Both girls shook their heads. A doctor. Another shake. Anywhere you stayed, longer than a few days? Lenny hesitated. Then said quietly. We didn't stay. Maris wrote that down. No judgment. No reaction. Just truth. From across the room, Cashin watched. He had built companies from nothing. Negotiated deals that changed entire industries. But this. Watching two little girls explain their existence in fragments. This felt like the hardest thing he had ever seen. Maris typed again. Then stopped. Her expression didn't change. But something behind her eyes did. There's something here, she said. Cashin looked up immediately. What? Maris turned the tablet slightly toward him. There's an older record. Cashin stepped closer. Older? Yes, she said. Incomplete. Never finalized. Nova tilted her head. What does incomplete mean? Maris glanced at her. It means someone started something and didn't finish it. Cashin's eyes moved to the line on the screen. One name stood out. Guardian of Record, Dorian Pike. Cashin read it again. Slowly. Who is that? He asked. Maris kept her voice neutral. On paper, a temporary guardian assigned during an early intake attempt. Nova frowned. Guardian means a grown-up, right? Yes. Nova's voice was simple. He didn't help. It wasn't angry. Just true. Cashin felt something tighten in his chest. If there was a guardian, he said, why are there no records now? Maris answered carefully. Because the process wasn't completed. No follow-up. No verification. Lenny's voice dropped. So we're missing? Maris looked at her directly. No. You're here. A small pause. Then she added. But the system doesn't know where to put you. Cashin exhaled slowly. And that means... Maris didn't soften it this time. It means the system may move them, while it figures that out. Nova's shoulders stiffened instantly. Move means not here. Maris didn't deny it. Cashin's voice shifted. Still calm. But colder now. How long do we have? Maris met his eyes. 48 hours. The words echoed louder this time. Because now they had weight. Real weight. Lenny's hands slowly tightened in her lap. Nova looked between them. Then back at Cashin. Are we being sent away? Cashin didn't hesitate. No. The word came firm. Grounded. Final. Nova searched his face. Not even if the rules say so? Cashin held her gaze. Not without a fight. That word, fight, felt new in the room. Not loud, but powerful. Maris closed her folder. I'll start the process, she said. Cashin nodded. Do it. She stood, then paused for a moment, looking at the girls. You're safe right now, she said gently. Right now. Lenny heard that part. Nova heard it too. Because children like them. They listen to the parts adults don't mean to emphasize. Maris walked toward the door. Cashin followed her, lowering his voice as they stepped into the hallway. What are the chances they stay? He asked. Maris didn't give a false answer. That depends on how fast we move, and what shows up in those records. Cashin nodded once. We'll be faster. Maris studied him for a moment. You understand this becomes legal, she said. Court. Oversight. Decisions you don't fully control. Cashin's voice didn't waver. I understand. She held his gaze. Then be ready. When the door closed behind her, the apartment felt different. Not unsafe, but no longer still. Cashin stood there for a second, then turned back. Inside, Lenny and Nova hadn't moved. They sat exactly the same way. Hands folded, feet dangling, waiting. Cashin walked back toward them slowly. Nova spoke first. Is she coming back? Yes. Lenny asked the question that mattered more. Will we still be here when she does? Cashin stopped in front of them, looked at both of them. And for the first time since that night under the bridge, he didn't just feel responsible. He felt something deeper, something heavier, something that didn't leave room for hesitation. You're not going anywhere, he said. The words were steady, but the truth behind them was about to be tested. The words stayed in the room long after he said them. "You're not going anywhere." They didn't echo. They settled. Quiet, heavy, uncertain. Because for Lenny and Nova, promises weren't something you believed. They were something you waited to see break. Nova looked down at her hands. Lenny watched Cashin's face like she was memorizing it, just in case it changed. Neither of them smiled. Neither of them relaxed. But they didn't ask anything else. And somehow, that silence said more than trust ever could. The day moved forward, but slower now. Like time itself understood it mattered. Cashin stayed close, but not too close. He didn't hover. He didn't overwhelm. He just made sure they felt held without being watched. At the table, Nova colored again. This time, she drew something different. A house. Simple lines. A square. A triangle roof. 2 windows. And 3 small stick figures standing in front. Lenny leaned over. "Who's that?" she asked quietly. Nova didn't look up. "That's us." Lenny paused, then pointed at the 3rd figure. "And that?" Nova hesitated, then said softly, "That's maybe." Lenny didn't question it. She just nodded. Because maybe was the closest thing they had to hope. Across the room, Cashin stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear. Noah's voice came through sharp, focused. "I've reviewed what you sent." Cashin didn't look away from the girls. "And?" "This guardian, Dorian Pike, he's not flagged," Noah said. "No criminal record. No active violations." Cashin's jaw tightened. But there's nothing else," Noah continued. "No follow-up care. No records of support. No school, no medical, no housing history tied to him." Cashin exhaled slowly. "So he exists, but he didn't show up." "Exactly," Noah said. "And that's a problem." Cashin's voice lowered. "For who?" Noah didn't hesitate. "For the girls." Cashin's eyes shifted to Lenny and Nova again. They were sharing crayons now. Quiet. Careful. Used to taking up as little space as possible. "What do we do?" Cashin asked. "We file for emergency caregiver authorization," Noah replied. "Today. That gives you temporary legal standing." "And Pike?" "He gets notified." Cashin's grip on the phone tightened slightly. "And then?" "Then he can object." Silence. The kind that carries weight. Cashin spoke again, slower this time. "And if he does?" Noah didn't soften it. "Then it becomes a fight." Cashin's gaze didn't move. "Good." He ended the call. For a moment, he just stood there. Not thinking. Not planning. Just deciding. When he turned back, Nova was watching him. Kids always know. Even when you don't say anything. "Was that about us?" she asked. Cashin walked over and crouched beside her. "Yes." Nova nodded slowly. "Is it bad?" Cashin shook his head. "It's serious." Lenny looked up. Serious means people decide things. Cashin met her eyes. "Yeah." Nova's voice dropped. "And kids go where people decide." Cashin didn't deny it. But he didn't accept it either. "Not this time," he said. Lenny studied him. "Why?" Cashin paused. "Because that answer mattered." Then he said, "Because I'm here." Simple. But it carried something deeper than explanation. Nova looked back at her drawing. She picked up a crayon and added something. A door. Right in the center of the house. She colored it slowly. Carefully. Then she whispered, "This one doesn't close." Lenny glanced at her. Then at Cashin. And for a brief moment, something in her eyes softened. Not trust, but less doubt. Later that evening, dinner was quiet again. Not uncomfortable, just careful. Nova ate slowly, like she was still adjusting to the idea that there would be more later. Lenny kept glancing toward the hallway. Cashin noticed. "What is it?" he asked. Lenny hesitated, then said, "Where do we put our things?" Cashin blinked slightly. "Your things." She nodded. "The backpack," Nova added softly, "so it doesn't look messy." Cashin understood. This wasn't about organization. It was about permission, about not overstaying. He stood and walked toward the guest room. "Come with me." They followed him quietly. Inside the room, everything was still the same. Untouched. Cashin walked to the closet and opened it. Empty. Clean. Waiting. "You can put your things here," he said. Lenny stepped forward slowly. She opened her backpack. Inside, there wasn't much. A small shirt, a pair of socks, and the folded paper. She held it for a second, then placed it gently on the shelf. Not hidden, not protected, just placed, like it didn't need to be guarded anymore. Nova watched her, then whispered, "Is it okay to leave it there?" Cashin nodded. "It's okay." That word again. Okay. It sounded simple, but to them, it meant everything. They stood there for a moment, looking at the closet, at the space, at the idea of belonging somewhere, even just a little. But later that night, something shifted. Cashin noticed it before he saw it. The quiet had changed. He walked down the hallway. The guest room door was slightly open. Inside, the bed was made. Too neat. The blankets folded perfectly. The pillows aligned. Cashin's chest tightened. He stepped in slowly. The room was empty. For a second, his heart dropped. Then he heard something. A soft shuffle. From down the hall. He followed it. And found them. In the laundry room. Sitting behind a rolling cart. Knees pulled to their chests. Backpack packed again. Ready. Nova looked up first. "We're ready." Cashin stopped. His voice came low. "Ready for what?" Lenny answered quietly. "So it's easier." Cashin stepped closer. "Easier for who?" Nova swallowed. "For you." The words hit harder than anything before. Lenny added, eyes fixed on the floor. "You said rules matter." Nova nodded slightly. "We heard you talking about papers." Lenny's fingers tightened around the backpack. "If papers make trouble." She paused, then finished softly. "We can go." The room felt smaller, heavier. Cashin crouched down in front of them. "Slow. Careful. You don't leave because adults are uncomfortable," he said. Nova frowned slightly. "But that's how it works." Cashin shook his head. "Not this time." Lenny looked up, really looked at him. And for the first time, there was something fragile in her eyes. Not fear, not doubt. Something closer to hope. But hope is dangerous when you've been disappointed before. So she asked one last question. "What if the rules say we have to?" Cashin didn't answer right away. He looked at them, really looked at them. Two little girls sitting on a cold floor, already prepared to leave a place that had only just begun to feel warm. Not because someone told them to, because they assumed they would have to. That was the part that hurt the most. He reached forward slowly and took the backpack from Lenny's hands, not pulling, not forcing, just holding it for a second. "You packed already?" he said quietly. Lenny nodded. "That's what you do before people change their minds." Nova added in a small voice. So it doesn't take long. Cashin exhaled slowly, steadying something inside himself. Then he set the backpack down beside him. Look at me, he said gently. They did. Carefully. Like they were bracing for the truth. If the rules say you have to leave, Cashin said, his voice calm but grounded, then I change the rules. Nova blinked. Lenny frowned slightly. Can you do that? She asked. Cashin didn't smile. Legally, he said. The word sounded unfamiliar to them. Heavy. But something about the way he said it made it feel possible. Nova tilted her head. So, louder rules? Cashin nodded once. Yeah, louder rules. Silence. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was something else trying to grow. Cashin reached for a nearby shelf and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. Then he grabbed a pen. Come here, he said. They hesitated. Then slowly moved closer. Cashin placed the paper on top of the laundry machine. We're making a new list, he said. Nova looked at Lenny. Lenny looked at the paper. A better one? Nova asked. Cashin nodded. A real one. He wrote slowly, clearly, so they could read every word. Today I stay. He paused, then added the next line. Tomorrow I stay. Lenny leaned in closer. Nova's eyes followed the pen. Cashin wrote again. The day after, still stay. Lenny's breath caught slightly. That's allowed? She whispered. Cashin looked at her. I'm making it allowed. Nova pointed at the paper. What about when people come and ask questions? Cashin didn't hesitate. Then we answer them. And if they don't like the answers? Nova asked. Cashin's voice stayed calm. Then we explain better. Lenny's fingers lightly touched the edge of the paper. Careful. Like it might disappear. What if they still say no? She asked. Cashin met her eyes. Then I say yes louder. This time, something changed. Not big. Not dramatic. But real. Nova leaned slightly into Lenny. Lenny didn't pull away. The tension in their shoulders eased. Just a little more. The backpack stayed on the floor. Unopened. Unneeded. For now. That night, the house felt different. Not quiet in a fragile way. Quiet in a steady way. Like something had taken root. But outside of that calm, things were moving. Fast. Noah arrived early the next morning. Laptop in hand. Legal pad under his arm. The kind of focus that didn't leave room for mistakes. Cashin met him in the living room. What do we have? Cashin asked. Noah didn't waste time. I filed the emergency petition, he said. That gives you temporary standing. And Pike? He's been notified. Cashin nodded. And? Noah exhaled slightly. And he hasn't responded yet. Cashin's eyes narrowed just a little. That's not good. No, Noah agreed. It means he's thinking. Across the room, Lenny and Nova sat quietly at the table. Crayons in front of them. But they weren't coloring. They were listening. Children always do. Nova raised her hand slightly, like she was in a classroom. Is it about the paper man? Noah paused, then looked at Cashin. Cashin nodded. Yeah, he said. Nova lowered her hand slowly. Does he want us? The question landed softer than expected, but deeper. Cashin walked over and crouched beside her. He wants control, he said. Nova frowned. That's not the same. No, Cashin said. It's not. Lenny looked up. Then why does he get to decide? Noah answered this time. Because his name is on a form. Nova looked at the table. Paper again. Lenny's voice dropped. Paper always decides. Cashin reached over and gently tapped the new list they had made. Not always. Nova glanced at it, then back at him. This one counts too? Cashin nodded. This one matters more. They didn't fully understand it, but they wanted to. And sometimes, wanting is the first step to believing. A knock came at the door mid-morning. Not loud, not aggressive, but certain. Cashin stood. Noah closed his laptop slowly. They both knew. This wasn't casual. Cashin walked to the door and opened it. Maris stood there again, folder in hand. Expression calm, but tighter than before. I have an update, she said. Cashin stepped aside. Come in. Inside, the air shifted again. Not fear, but pressure. Maris walked toward the table where the girls sat. She knelt slightly. Hi again. Nova looked at her. Did the rules change? Maris didn't smile this time. They're being discussed. Lenny's fingers tightened around her crayon. That means something's wrong. Maris glanced at Cashin, then back at the girls. The guardian on record has been contacted, she said carefully. Nova's eyes flickered. The paper man. Yes. Lenny's voice dropped. Is he coming here? Maris hesitated. Just enough. Then. He might. The room went still. Nova looked at Cashin. Not asking. Just checking. Lenny slowly reached for Nova's hand. Held it tight. Cashin stepped forward slightly. His voice calm. Controlled. Then we'll be ready. But inside him, something had already shifted. Because this was no longer just about protecting two girls. No. It was about facing the man who had already failed them once. And proving he wouldn't be allowed to do it again. The room didn't breathe for a moment after that. Then the knock came again. Not louder. Just patient. Cashin walked to the door and opened it. Dorian Pike stood there like he belonged anywhere he chose to be. Clean coat. Calm eyes. A faint smile that didn't reach anything real. Mr. Vale, Pike said smoothly. Cashin didn't offer his hand. Dorian Pike. Pike stepped inside without waiting to be invited twice. His eyes moved across the room, taking in everything. The space. The order. And then, the girls. Lenny and Nova sat frozen at the table, their small hands locked together. Pike looked at them like someone examining a file he had once misplaced. Lenny. Nova, he said, voice soft but distant. You've grown. Nova didn't respond. Lenny leaned slightly closer to her. Cashin stepped forward. You had your chance, he said quietly. Pike didn't react. Things don't always go as planned, he replied. Noah stood beside Cashin, calm and sharp. Care to explain 2 years of absence? Noah asked. Pike adjusted his sleeve. The system is complicated. Cashin's voice turned colder. Children aren't. Silence. The kind that strips excuses down to nothing. Maris stepped forward slightly. Mr. Pike, we're here to assess your involvement, she said. Pike nodded politely. Of course. He turned his attention back to the girls. You can come with me now, he said simply. The words were quiet, but they hit like something heavy falling. Nova's grip on Lenny tightened instantly. Lenny shook her head before she even realized she had. No, she whispered. Pike tilted his head slightly. It's what's supposed to happen. Nova looked at Cashin. Her eyes said everything her voice couldn't. Cashin stepped closer. They're not going anywhere, he said. Pike's smile thinned. That's not your decision. Noah stepped in. It is for now. Pike's gaze flickered. Temporary doesn't mean permanent. Cashin didn't look away. Presence does. The room held still. Every word now mattered. Maris opened her folder. "We've reviewed the records," she said. "There's no evidence of continued care from you." Pike exhaled softly. "I was overwhelmed." Lenny's voice came small, but clear. "Then why didn't you come back?" That question didn't accuse. It didn't shout. It simply asked the truth. Pike didn't answer. Because there wasn't one. Nova leaned closer to Cashin. "He didn't want us," she whispered. Cashin felt something break and settle at the same time. Not anger. Not rage. Something stronger. Clarity. He stepped forward. "They're not files," Cashin said quietly. "They're not delays or paperwork or something you circle back to when it's convenient." Pike's expression didn't change, but his silence did. Cashin's voice deepened. "They waited under a bridge and still learned how to be polite so the world wouldn't get mad at them." Nova's fingers curled into his sleeve. Lenny held onto her tighter. Cashin looked directly at Pike. "They didn't need a name on paper," he said. "They needed someone who showed up." That was the moment. The one that shifted everything. Because it wasn't about winning anymore. It was about truth standing long enough to be seen. Maris closed her folder. "I'll be filing the report," she said calmly. "Based on everything observed, the children remain here under continued authorization." Pike's jaw tightened slightly. "For now," he said. Noah nodded. "For as long as it takes." Pike looked at the girls one last time. Not with warmth. Not with regret. Just distance. Then he turned and walked out. The door closed behind him. And something inside the room finally released. Not loudly, but deeply. Nova let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Lenny's shoulders dropped. Slowly. Carefully. Like they were learning what it felt like not to be ready to leave. Cashin knelt in front of them. "You're staying," he said softly. Nova searched his face. "Not just today?" Cashin shook his head. "Not just today." Lenny's voice trembled slightly. "Not just maybe?" Cashin reached out and gently held both their hands. "Not just maybe." Silence. Then Nova whispered. "Then it's real." Cashin nodded. "It's real." Lenny leaned forward first. Just a little. Not a hug. Not yet. But closer than before. Nova followed. And for the first time, they didn't look like children waiting for permission to exist. They looked like children who finally belonged somewhere. Days passed. Not rushed. Not uncertain. Just steady. The list on the paper stayed on the table. Today a stay. Tomorrow a stay. And every morning. It came true. The court followed. The paperwork moved. Names were written where they should have been all along. Lenny ran. Nova ran. Names that didn't disappear anymore. One evening, rain returned. Soft. Gentle. Cashin stood by the window. The same city. The same lights. But everything felt different. Behind him, Nova laughed quietly at something Lenny said. Real laughter. Unpracticed. Unplanned. Cashin turned. And for a moment, he just watched. Not as a man who had saved someone, but as a man who had finally understood something. That love isn't something you promise. It's something you prove again and again, until someone stops packing their bags. Nova looked up. "Are you coming?" she asked. Cashin smiled faintly. "Yeah," he said. He walked over, sat beside them, and this time, they didn't sit carefully. They leaned into him without asking, like it was already allowed. And outside, the bridge still stood. But it no longer held their story, because home was no longer a place they waited for. It was a place that chose them back. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from.